Today I'm just going to give you a very short portion of the Herosamard and make it more personal, how it affected people and things that happened. The other day I was watching something from National Geographic. I can't watch those shows very often because they're so cruel. Nature is cruel. And I was thinking, you know, this is how it is when it's just the animals and they don't have the feelings that we have. It's the survival of the fittest, and they're so cruel. But then I was reading the books about Herosamard, and it was just as cruel as what was happening in the ocean with the fish, where their lives were constantly in danger. So today I'm going to talk about 3 different items about the Herosamard. One of them is going to be, it was so ancient and so modern, things that were happening in Van. It was like a dichotomy. The other one was, what was the attitude of the people, the villagers mainly, and then how it changed. And the third part is about ordinary people. To be able to give this talk, I was looking at 3 books. One is by Onnik Mkhitaryan. This was very interesting because he was the secretary of the Defense Council. So not only did he have to take minutes, but he also had to keep a diary of what was going on. So he gives a lot of details about it. The next one was Hourig Gosoyan. He was a teacher. He was also a member of the Defense Council. And the third one was a Kuratzi. He was from Shushansk. And this one was very interesting because I'd never read this one before. Keram Vartanyan was his name. And what's so interesting about him is that not only does he tell everything from the villagers' point of view, but he was also one of those who, after the defense fell, well, the defense was fine, but afterwards when they had to leave, he went through Iraq. And this would have been very important for a lot of us because that's how our parents came here. They went through Iraq, while some of them went to Armenia. So his book was very interesting. He was 18 years old at the time, so he knew exactly what was going on. So the first one is ancient yet modern. Now, you can't get any ancient than Van. It was Urartu before. It was the capital of Urartu. One time I was giving a talk to some American friends, and one of them came afterwards and said, here you are standing here and you are talking to us of ancient times. And she was sort of in awe of this. And this is how Van is when you look at it. It can't get any more interior in Asia Minor than Van. If you go a few more miles, you're ending up in different countries. It's so far from Istanbul. It's so far from Europe. And yet, some of the things these people did was amazing. Now, this is kind of funny. My brother Hourig comes over for Surj very often. And since we've been talking about Van, he keeps saying this. You know, he's the photographer. And he says, now, how did they have all these pictures? This is amazing. They had to have film. They had to have the chemicals to develop this. Well, there's really more than that. They even built a cannon. They built powder for their cartridges, getting everything together from the pharmacy, from the blacksmiths, from the jewelers. So everyone had something to do over there. So this was ancient, yet they were modern. You know, they had the chemicals. And I, being a teacher, I'm always amazed that they had a printing press. This is in the late 1800s. I mean, how many cities in Europe had that? And Istanbul, of course, had it, but not too many had the printing press. They had a school for girls. Now, that is really amazing. Well, women couldn't even vote. They had a school for girls in Van at the time. So these were really awesome things. It was like a dichotomy. They were the ones in the villages who would never revolt, no matter how hard their life got. And yet they were the ones who stood up to the Turks and who fought for a whole month until the Russian army arrived. So these were like opposites that were happening over there. When the Russian general Nikolaev got to Van after the defense and he took over, he wanted to see their facilities. And he went and he looked and he said, have some of you been in the army? They said no. Have you been in the Russian army? No. Have you been in any army? No. And yet everything they had done, they had been able to do warfare against a regular Turkish army and of course the Kurdish tribes that were coming at them. So these were awesome things about Van They created a defense council, and they created it in no time. This defense council had to take care of a city under siege. They had never taken care of a city before. They had never had a government before. And here's what they had to take care of. Not only war, but police, supplies of food, distribution of food, and plus all these migrating people coming from the villages so they wouldn't die. Like about 10,000 people came from the villages to Van because they would have been killed otherwise. So there were a lot of things to worry about: their health, their food, pestilence. A lot of things could happen when all these people were together. And I would like to read to you here some of the orders from this group. This was kind of interesting. They would all send out orders, and one of them was, verify all reports. Must be signed. The reports must be signed by leaders, and they are accountable for unfounded rumor. Now you would think, why would they say that? But just think, here they are under siege in a little city. Someone with rumors could create panic. So there was a lot of wisdom with these people. And then they would say they needed shovels and picks, you know, for the ramparts and for the walls or for digging trenches. They would say, return them every night. Do not waste any ammunition, because there wasn't enough ammunition. Make them count. And now the modern thought in this: never revile the religion of the enemy. Wouldn't you want Turks to have done that for us? But that wasn't to happen. So these were the dichotomies I was talking about. The situation, what it was. Before the defense of Van started, the Kuratsis, the villagers, were in the worst shape. In fact, in all of the interior, the Kuratsis had the worst shape. In fact, someone had said that their lot was worse than that of the rabbits of their field. And the reason is, of course, the rabbits are defenseless, totally defenseless. They can't fight back, plus they can hide, so the villagers couldn't hide. Their problem was worse. So the Turks, who had decided to annihilate the Armenians, had different ways of doing this. For instance, they would come and they would say, well, there's the war going on, we need food. They would take the food. They would take livestock, and the villagers were left with nothing. There could be famine because of this. Some other things that they did, they would come and say, we need soldiers. So they would take all the young men, but they didn't use them as soldiers. They would kill them, or they would even beat them, or they would abuse them if they kept them alive. They wouldn't give them enough food or clothing. So in every way, the villagers' lot was absolutely awful. But then things started to change. If you recall, we have talked about this before, Hourig, who wrote to them and said, you have to defend yourself. Rafi, the writer, and so many others who would write. The political parties who came and brought guns and who trained them so that they could fight when there arose the need. So this is kind of a nice thing, because they used to create so many songs, the villagers, and we see them in the Herapochagan songs, the revolutionary songs. And you can see the attitude changing. I'm going to read this for you. It says, this is from Erzurum song. The Armenian villagers hadn't seen swords and rifles. He left the field and he took the sword and rifle instead of the shovel. And this is what happened because of these men that were the heads of the Armenian people. But today, I'm not going to talk about them. We know a lot about them. We know about Aram Manukyan, how he organized the defense. And like I said, they lasted for about a month. And of course, they were the lucky ones because the Russian army came. Had it not been for the Russian army coming, we would have been totally annihilated. Mary and Joseph were going to Bethlehem. And no one knew this young couple, just villagers, coming and the Messiah would be born of them. No one knew that. So God used ordinary people. Well, that's exactly what happened in Van. God used ordinary people. I'm going to talk about a few of them that you may never have heard of, because I thought this was so personal and really so horrible too. One of them was Shirin Hagopian. He was in one of the villages, and they had decided to get all the people from the villages together and to walk them to Aikestan, which is a suburb of Van. By the way, there were two areas where they were fighting, Aikestan and Van. So he had to get these villagers together. So he was out working. He was not in his village. When the people from the village left, his wife was sick, so she couldn't leave. And so couldn't a lot of older people and some children, among them his 4 children. Well, he's out there helping the people, gathering all these people while his family's in the village. They went back trying to get them, but the village was surrounded. He couldn't get them out. So his wife and children died. They were killed. But this never stopped him. He took all these people, gathered them, and got them safely to Van. And then we see his name coming up more and more. He did this and he did that. He was hurting, of course, but he never let it stop him. Another one was in the village of Shushan, and this came from that Kerem Vartanian's book. The villagers they didn't have many, they did not have many guns. But as you know, the Turkish soldiers would come and they would say, give us your guns, because they wanted to take them before massacring them. Well, they would come day after day and they would beat the men and they would break their bones. It was so bad that the villagers decided, let's get some old rifles together and give it to them so they'll leave us alone. But that did not satisfy them. This time they got all the men together and they started a huge bonfire. This is what the commander did. And he said, if you do not bring the guns to us, we are going to take these, whatever, I guess it was skewers. They had put them in the fire. And they said, we're going to go and burn your men if you don't do this. So everybody was scared to death and they didn't know what to do. Well, lo and behold, a bunch of women come over there, Armenian women. They get their pails of water and dump it on the fire. And one of them, named Baidzat, turns to this commander, and she's really mad at him. She says, if you keep this up, we're going down to the city to complain about you. This is when before, the Van thing has started. Well, this man was taken aback, so he left. But she saved the life of these people. But, when you think of the courage, here they are, they can do anything to you. And these women jumped up. I just want to show you that it wasn't just the men who were courageous, so were the women. Then we look at the defense itself, and we see the people working. The children, the young children, would go out there and get the cartridges, empty cartridges. At night, they would fill them up with powder, and in the morning, they would take those to the soldiers so they could fight, because they did not have enough ammunition. The women had gotten groups together, so they would sew for the men. Everybody was doing something, or they would help in the hospital. What I was really amazed about, there were these villagers who really couldn't fight. They didn't have guns, they didn't know how to fight, but they knew how to use a shovel. So they would dig the trenches for the people, and then they would build the walls with the help of the masons. They would help build walls or the ramparts. Well, every day, those ramparts would go down because the Turks were bombing and shooting at them. Every night, they would go and rebuild them. Well, it got so bad toward the end that they were getting ruined 4 or 5 times a day. And these men would still go out with those bullets coming at them, and they would still rebuild them. And what was interesting, when one would die, the next one would take the place. It was like there was no fear. They were together, they were working together. The defense lasted from April 18 till May 15. And like I said, the Russian army came. Well, of course, this was great. But then the Russians had their own, their own ideas about this. They wanted Armenia without Armenian. They pulled their army back. And so the people of Van had no recourse but to leave with them. So they went back to Armenia. But then some of them decided to come back because they thought they could still live there. And they came and they started building even and planting. But a lot of them died because the massacres began again. They started killing them. So this time they left, some for Hayastan, and some of them, they were going to Hayastan, but they thought the roads were closed, so they went down to Iraq. And this was a part where my father and a lot of your people probably came through. And then, of course, they went to Iraq and from on to Jerusalem and all over the Middle East. The Vanetzis like Gurung. You played Gurung today, right? Didn't you play the crane? They like the crane. That's their bird. But today, I'm going to be finishing with a poem that's not about the Gurung, but it's about the swallow, which is a migrating bird, Zizernak in Armenian. And I want to read this to you because it's so much like us. The swallow was building its nest. He was singing and he was building. And every time he would add a twig, he would remember his old nest. He had built a nest once, and he had repaired it many times. But this time, when he returned, he found the nest in ruins. And now, once again, he was building his nest, and he was singing. And every time he added a twig, he remembered his old nest. The Vanities, just like the rest of the Armenian, came back, tried to rebuild, but they found everything in ruins. Their nest was in ruins. So they went all over the world, and they built there. Even though they had this gaping wound in their hearts that would never go away, they still sang, they still danced, they built churches, they built schools, they built families. I mean, they raised families. The work still continues today, a few days before Thanksgiving, and I would like to thank those people who fought, because that's the reason we are here today. But above all, I would like to thank the ordinary people, and that includes you, the ordinary people who worked so hard and who gave their lives and who are still doing that today. Thank you.